Please welcome President of the Heritage Foundation and Heritage Action, Dr. Kevin Roberts.
Thanks. Thanks for that warm welcome. It's certainly a great day to be in Washington, D.C. I mean, if you're like us at Heritage, you're not tired of winning. And in fact, that's what we're going to celebrate today, 1 year of winning at the Department of Health and Human Services. Not something that often has come out of the mouths of us at Heritage. And the reason we're going to do that is because we have probably the most consequential public health official leading that agency in modern American history. We also have, I should say, great members of the U.S. Senate. I see Senator Tommy Tuberville, who are aiding that agenda. So those of you here in person, those of you who have joined online, welcome. We're in for a great conversation with the gentleman I will now introduce. Secretary Kennedy was confirmed by the Senate about a year ago. He's the 26th Secretary of Health and Human Services. Since then, just as a quick recap, although he and I will get into this in our conversation, he and his team have been hard at work at making America healthy again. They've begun the process of reversing childhood chronic disease, releasing new dietary guidelines that are going to get Americans eating real food again. We at Heritage, my colleague Dr. Jay Richards, who will lead a panel discussion when the Secretary and I have concluded our own discussion, are particularly excited about the Secretary's comments over the weekend about making eating beef great again. This is a revolution in protein. The list continues, ending HHS-funded research that used human fetal tissue from elective abortions, increasing transparency and ensuring scientific integrity across all health agencies, getting petroleum-based synthetic dyes out of our food supply, and overhauling the CDC's childhood immunization recommendations, and so many more. But I am going to let the man himself explain this. And so momentarily, as the Secretary comes to the stage, he and I will then sit down, have a conversation with a handful of questions that I know are top of mind for you. And then, as I mentioned, Jay Richards will lead a wonderful panel discussion to follow. Most importantly, considering the work he's done in his first year as Secretary of the Department, and for a lifetime of great work putting the American people and their needs first, please give a warm welcome to Secretary Bobby Kennedy. Guy at Heritage, Mr. Secretary. You know, I told my wife and kids last night as we were watching the Super Bowl that sitting down with you, I would feel like I almost have to give a dietary confession based on what I ate during the Super Bowl party. So we won't go into details, but I'm back on plan today. Jay Richards, who heads up our Restoring American Wellness campaign, who I mentioned earlier, is sort of my accountability partner in that regard. So he's looking at me askance. Speaking of the Super Bowl, one of the ads that actually was good was the Mike Tyson ad. I say that as a longtime fan of boxing, growing up, watching him and seeing him with that powerful memorial to his sister was really touching. Tell us about that ad and what you hope its impact will be.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me, and thank you for all the extraordinary support that Heritage has given to me during the transition and afterwards. It's been great, and I want to thank Coach Tuberville for being here too, because he's been one of my best allies in the Senate and is part of the Senate MAHA caucus, and has just been a great friend to me throughout this process. I really value that, Coach, as you know. The ad was done by the MAHA Alliance, which is, there's people in the audience from MAHA, and I actually talked to Bill Arnell and Brett Ratner, who is who directed the ad, the two of them. And Brett is the same director who did the Melania film. And they said to me that Brett has been, since he was 12 years old, the best friends with Mike Tyson, and both of them knew his story about his battle with obesity and the death of his sister, who died of an obesity-related heart attack when she was 25. And the tears that he sheds in that ad were real. They had a script, they knew his story, and they wrote out a script, and they tried to get him to read it for almost 8 hours, and it was not working. And then they just said, let's let him talk. And that very, very powerful ad is what came out of that, just an outpouring from him, from his heart. But what he was talking about, which is that we need to get off of the dangers of processed food, is real. When I was a kid, we had the healthiest kids in the world in our country. We spent, during my uncle's administration, when I was a 10-year-old boy living in this town, we spent 0 on chronic disease. Today, we spend 4.3 trillion a year. And it is about 40 cents out of every taxpayer dollar that's collected is going to treat diet-induced chronic diseases. And a lot of these diseases can be cured. For example, we were talking about juvenile diabetes. Most cases of juvenile diabetes, you can actually lose the diagnosis by simply changing your diet. And doctors don't know, many doctors don't know how to give that kind of advice. 80% of physicians say they don't feel competent to give nutritional advice because they're learning pharmacology in medical school, and there's a pill for every ill, and we're not focusing on what the causes are and how to prevent them. And if we're going to beat this, that's what we have to do. And the primary culprit is ultra-processed foods, refined carbohydrates. 70% of the food that our kids eat are ultra-processed foods, and it's killing them. And it's a spiritual warfare. It is actually it's a war at scale against cellular activity. It's an assault on our children. And it's much worse than cigarettes. Everybody agrees cigarettes are bad. This is much worse. The costs to our society are existential. 77% of our children can no longer qualify for military service, and most of that is diet related. And we need to change what we're feeding these children, or we're going to lose our country. And diabetes rates have gone up now. We're spending almost $1 trillion a year on metabolic dysfunction that is mainly through diabetes. When I was a kid, the average pediatrician would see 1 case of juvenile diabetes over a 40 or 50-year career. Today, 38% of our teens are diabetic or pre-diabetic, and we know what's causing it. In China, 25 years ago, there was virtually 0 diabetes, and today 51% of the adult population is diabetic or pre-diabetic. Why? Because they opened 20,000 fast food joints, and they allowed the import of American processed food. And they started making it on their own, but mainly it's coming from our country because we subsidize the feedstock for ultra-processed food, and we make it artificially low. So this is not about a market. It's a distortion of the market. And it's a distortion that we're paying for at the outset, and then we're paying for it again with food stamps, and then we're paying for it again with Medicaid, because 78% of the kids on food stamps end up on Medicaid, and we're treating their diabetes. The autism rates have gone from 0.8 in 10,000 in 1970, so less than 1 in 10,000, to 1 in 31 kids today. In California, the numbers are 1 in every 19 kids, 1 in every 12.5 boys. So what are we doing to our children? And the answer to that is we need to start getting them real food. and we need a national movement. And, I sense it's happening in this country, that people are beginning to realize that they're being mass poisoned. When I was a kid, 5% of kids were obese. Today, it's approaching 20%. And 40% of adults, 75% of adults are obese or overweight. And it's not because Americans suddenly became lazy or indolent or hungry. It's because we're mass poisoning them. And we have now the worst health outcomes. We spend 2 to 3 times what the Europeans are spending per capita on food. And we're 79th in terms of outcome. We have the highest infant mortality rate in the developed world, the highest maternal mortality rate. We've lost 6 years to Europe in terms of longevity in the last 20 years. And it's existential for our country. And we've got to focus on it. We've got to, by the way, it's hurting the farmers too. Because if your whole diet is coming from ultra-processed food, that puts the power of agriculture and food production into the hands of these corporations, these multinational corporations that own BlackRock and Goldman, et cetera. And it takes power away from the farmers, from the ranchers, from the local producers. And we need to start moving, for all of these good reasons, we need to start moving back to eating real food. And the dietary guidelines, when we got them, I was supposed to publish them my first week in office because they've been prepared by the Biden administration, but they're over 400 pages long. And they were all driven by the same mercantile impulses that put Fruit Loops at the top of the food pyramid. It's not food. It was happening. There's nothing nutritious in that. But it was happening because of agency capture, because USDA and FDA had been captured by the industries that they were supposed to regulate. And the lobbyists for those industries were writing the food, the dietary guidelines, and drawing up the food pyramid. And so Brooke Rollins, the greatest agricultural secretary in my lifetime, understood this, and we talk almost every day on the phone, and we work, we brought the best nutritionists together from the leading universities in our country, about a dozen of the top nutritionists in the world. And we thought it was going to take us about a month, but because of the big knowledge gaps, because the NIH and FDA have not been doing their job. They've not been studying what is the etiology of these diseases, what's actually causing them. And so they worked very hard, and there was blood shed over every recommendation, but we ended up with under 10 pages, I think it's 6 pages. And it's written in plain English, and you can summarize it in 3 words: eat real food. And we took the politics out of it, and we made science-based, gold standard science-based recommendations. And these are recommendations that are going to keep us healthy. And we ended a 50-year war on saturated fats, which was all contrived by Procter & Gamble and the American Heart Association, which was funded by Pepsi and Procter & Gamble. And we developed guidelines that are actually health-based, and people should be eating protein. We took whole milk out of our schools. Whole milk the micronutrients of whole milk are designed to contribute to brain development, to physical development, to the functioning of your immune system, to metabolic energy. And we took that away from kids for 2 generations. 2 generations of children would grow up with essentially a kind of malnourishment, of being nutrient starved, of not having their brains fed. And we're going to end that we've ended it, and we're bringing back whole milk, and we're bringing back, meat and chicken and eggs and salmon and all the things that we're supposed to be eating. He said to me the other day, that there's a section of the grocery store that says, healthy food or organic food. And I said to him, do you know what they used to call that? Food. And we're bringing back real food.
So you're saying that whole grain Fruit Loops is not a food?
It is not, it's a food-like substance.
Thanks for that response, Mr. Secretary. Look ahead, we're celebrating the achievements of the first year, which you just recounted some of, and thank you for that. What can we expect over the next year, in addition to what I'm sure will be the continued great work by your department? I'm glad that you mentioned our great friend, my great personal friend, Secretary Rollins, who's done a tremendous job at agriculture. And the American people are learning that department, of course, controls a lot of this, and the tag team that the two of you have developed is really important for them. But give us a glimpse into your crystal ball for the next year or two regarding the agency's priorities.
Well, we're going to continue forcing the frontiers of good food and safe medicines and transparent gold standard science and all of our medications and all of our food. Marty is doing a really good job at FDA at fast-tracking new vegetable dyes. We did 2 more this week, so now we have 6 new ones because we're making it. The industry is working with us on all of these things. And they've been very, very good. And we're going to get rid of all the 9 synthetic petroleum-based food dyes by the end of this year, but we're giving the industry options so that they can, and we also changed the regulations so that if you have vegetable-based dyes in your food, you can call them all natural still. You couldn't do that before. We're trying to make things easy on the industry, and they're working with us. We're focusing a lot this year on affordability and on transparency. And I'll give you a couple of examples. One is the MFNs, the most favored nations, and you guys all know this. We've been paying 10, 12, 2, 3 times, 10 or 12, 13, 15 times what Europeans pay for the same drug. And President Trump loves to tell this story about his friend who was taking the fat drug, or the fat pill, he calls. But that particular pill was created in a factory in New Jersey. The list price in this country was $1,300. The list price in London was $88. And that's not unusual. Unfortunately, that's the norm. The Europeans were very good at negotiating and said, we're just not going to pay more. And they pay enough so it's still economic for the pharmaceutical companies to give them most of these drugs. There's a lot of drugs that are available here that you can't get in Europe, including a lot of cancer drugs. They just refuse to pay for them. But now, President Trump, who understands the uses of power probably better than any other president in our history, has used tariffs to force the Europeans to raise their drug prices. But he told us 3 things. He said, I want an MFN, which every president since Clinton has promised. None of them have achieved. He said, in addition to that, and this, MFN, if you think about it, it's not good for the pharmaceutical companies because they're going to have to dramatically lower their prices here. But he said, secondly, I don't want to bankrupt the companies. I want America to still be the center of innovation around the globe. And third, I want them to all reshore their production to this country, which is going to cost them a tremendous amount of money too. So this just seemed like insurmountable, really crazy talk, and there was a long period of time when Dr. Oz and I were not answering our phone at 9 or 10 or 2 o'clock in the morning when the president was calling us because he was very forceful, I would say almost angry. And he wanted to, just breathing down our neck, trying to get this done. And we, because of President Trump, we've been able to, at HHS, to assemble this extraordinary caliber of people, personnel who have come into this agency. We've got many people at HHS who are CEOs and founders of multi-billion-dollar companies who walked away from those companies, divested, and came in because they wanted to do something good for our country. One of those is Chris Klomp, and I don't think anybody else could have managed these negotiations like he did. We negotiated with 16 of the 17 pharmaceutical companies. We brought them all to the table, and now we have agreements with all of them, and we are now going from paying the highest price in the world to paying the lowest. Whatever the lowest cost in Europe is going to pay, Europeans pay, we will pay, and in some cases even lower. And we were able to do that in a way, using the tariffs and President Trump's personal intervention. We were able to get the European nations to raise their drug prices, which of course none of them wanted to do. It's very unpopular. But he was able to do that, and the industry, when we announced these, made the announcements, instead of losing huge amounts of money, gained $1.3 trillion in stock value. Because there's certainty out there, they're going to be able to sell a lot more of these pharmaceuticals, although they're doing it at a tiny fraction of the price, and they're making a lot of it back in Europe. And so that is going to, in terms of affordability, that is going to dramatically change the equation in our country. We're doing other things too, which is we got prior authorization. Another thing that that 6 presidents have promised, prior authorizations, a worse experience for most Americans. They go to the doctor says you need a knee surgery, and you cannot get approval for it. Authorization from your insurance company for 6 months. And we got all of the 80% of the insurers, the largest company representing 80% of the American population, now agreeing to get rid of all of their prior authorization, except the ones that we agreed to. There's certain procedures, certain spinal surgeries, et cetera, where there's an incentive for doctors and hospitals to give the surgery when they're not needed. So in some cases we want to be able to, Medicaid, Medicare, we want to be able to look and give some approval in the private. And we want the private companies to do that too, to make sure that it's necessary and that it's in the patient's interest. But for everything else, prior authorization is now gone. You will have an answer at point of care. In other words, before you leave that doctor's office, you will know whether your insurance company is going to pay for it. And then we also brought the industry together, 400 tech companies. And this is, again, because the convening power that the president has to do something that every president has promised to do, which is to get rid of information blocking. The tech companies take your medical records, which you own, and then they won't give you access to them. And now we've got agreements from all of those companies, 400 companies. We got them all in a room, 400 of them. We started with 60, and the 60 biggest, and did the initial deal, and then all the other ones came on board. And now your medical records are going to be available. Everybody's records are going to be available on their cell phone. And this is going to dramatically change, again, the medical experience. If you live in New Jersey, you get hit by a car in Portland, Oregon, you're not going to have to spend the first hour at the hospital filling out a clipboard. You can go in there, the doctor will have your medical records. Also, I'm sure a lot of you have had heard stories about people who go to the doctors, and then the doctor does give you a prescription. You look it up on ChatGPT, and the ChatGPT tells you that actually could kill you. And there's so many stories like that out there, that AI is now better at diagnoses than doctors. Even when you bring in a doctor, it degrades the quality, the predictive acumen of AI. AI can now diagnose and in many cases prescribe better than physicians, and people will now have access to that. The AI will be able to read all your entire medical records, and this is important because when you go to that doctor, he's going to know your blood type. He's going to know your allergies. He's going to know, he's going to have access to years of medical records and know what your history is. But most doctors now are owned by corporations. They're owned by the hospitals, or they're owned by, hospital systems or insurers. And they have, typically they're given about 6 minutes per patient. So they don't really have the time to go through your entire medical record, but AI can do that. And that is going to end up saving a lot of lives and, giving people more precision and more control over their health. President Trump said to me, I want to make every American the CEO of their own health, help them make their own decisions and make them intelligently, and that's what we're trying to do. And we also are doing transparency. President Trump, in his first term, passed a price transparency legislation, but the Biden administration almost never enforced it. In fact, I've done more enforcement in 1 year than he did in 4 years. And now we've changed the regulations so that every hospital is going to have to comply. Very few post their records. Every hospital will now have to comply, and they will face enormous fines if they don't. And so, if you go to buy a car, and the guy said to you, I'm going to sell you this vehicle, but I'm not going to tell you what the price is till after you buy it.
This is how Congress operates, right?
You would not buy it. You go to a restaurant and the price are on the menu. Well, healthcare is the only place you're not allowed to do that. You can be a woman in this country and be pregnant for 9 months and not be able to find out, despite making a phone call every day, what it's going to cost you to have that baby. So we're going to post that, all the price for everything. If you want to know the cheapest MRI in your driving area, you'll be able to find that immediately. And I went through the website, the web page that we've designed. We were really genius. And again, these genius designers have come in from Silicon Valley, and Joe Gebbia, who's been amazing, and designed this website so that you can look at all the hospitals and all the medical centers and all the concierge services in your area. And I looked at it for pregnancy, for having a baby. And I looked at Manhattan and a mile around Manhattan. There are 30 hospitals, and each one has a different price. So the lowest price was $1,300. The highest price was $22,000. And everything in between, $3,000, $5,000, $9,000. And how can you have that kind of price chaos? The only way is because there's no market. And we're going to create now a market where consumers will have a choice, and that will drive down the cost of healthcare. We're also making the insurance companies post what they reimburse and what the provider gets for every procedure and illness. And that is going to dramatically lower prices in this country, because it's going to allow big businesses that are negotiating with that. If you're Aetna, you need the business of this, IBM or Accenture, somebody who has thousands of employees. You need to get that business. He's going to be able to look at what your profits are on every single procedure and use that as bargaining leverage to drive it down. So all of these systemic changes are ultimately going to, I think, very quickly drive down the cost of healthcare in this country and provide transparency and affordability to Americans. I don't think that any president I just can't think of anybody else who could have got this done. It was President Trump's understanding of the uses of power, and how strong the presidency actually is, and how much leverage we have over all of these people, nations, corporations who've been taking advantage of us in the past. And then also just the, I think he's probably the most business-friendly president we've had. Maybe George Bush was this business-friendly, but he's very business-friendly, and he admires business people more than anybody. He loves them, but he will not tolerate overreach, and he doesn't care about vested interests, and he doesn't care about offending powerful people. So it's a joy to work for him because he lets me do stuff that I don't think anybody else would ever let me do.
I'll just observe, Mr. Secretary, it's almost as if President Trump's second term being in this year we're celebrating America's 250th anniversary is providential for the American people. And your own leadership has been striking there. It's why it was a heartfelt introduction for me that I do think you are the most consequential public health official, certainly in my lifetime. I would sit here and have this conference. Yep, I think that's true. I'd sit and talk with you for a few hours, and I know you would be kind enough to do that, but I know that your staff believes that you've got something else on your schedule today. Which is hard to believe here at Heritage, but it is Monday in Washington, and you've been very busy. I'm going to ask you, though, just to take a couple minutes, if you don't mind, to speak as a dad to parents in this audience, in person. Our friends at C-SPAN are here, a few dozen media outlets, thousands of people online. What advice do you give us, and this is also Kevin asking, dad to dad, what advice do you give us and families who believe the system has failed them for decades?
Well, I'll go back to what you said about, President Trump's presidency being providential. And I think that too, and I think that it was providential that he lost, or that he was told that he was lost the last time around.
We love you in your role, Mr. Secretary.
I said he was told that he lost. But I think that, the fact that he had 4 years allowed him to put together this, really an extraordinary administration and to do things that he would not have been able to do if he had been allowed to take office last time around. But for me personally, I had 11 brothers and sisters. I had 70 first cousins. And I know what a healthy kid is supposed to look like. And I've seen this generation. I didn't know anybody with diabetes when I was a kid. I didn't know anybody with autism. And I was raised in the center of the movement for rights for people with intellectual disabilities. I worked in Special Olympics when I was 8 years old. And I didn't see these damaged kids, and now I see a whole generation that is damaged, that has autoimmune and neurological injuries, and all of these kids struggling with health issues. And I know that's not what children are supposed to look like. I have 6 of my 7 kids have allergies, and some of them are deadly anaphylactic allergies. And I didn't know anybody with that food allergy when I was a kid. And out of all those cousins I had, and hundreds of kids that I knew, I just never saw it. And now it's in every classroom. There's EpiPens in every classroom. And nobody's asking, why is this happening? And for 20 years, I was, screaming about this with nobody paying attention. No pediatricians, which is really strange. What happened to the pediatricians? They know, some of them have been working for 20 years, and they know that kids are not, they're seeing this increase, this influx in all these diseases. And I was censored and shut down. And I prayed every single day that God would put me in a place where I could fix this. And so for me, when President Trump asked me to join his campaign in August of 2024, it felt providential. It felt like the answer to prayers. And then, he kept his word to me on everything and more. He invited me to be part of his transition team. I'm the first HHS secretary in history that was able to choose all of my agency heads, Marty and Jay and Dr. Oz. That's never happened before. And I think because of that, we have a collegiality and a sense of teamwork. And, we're trying to make it easier for parents to make good choices. We're not telling people what to do. We're not starting a nanny state. If you live in this country, you ought to be able to buy a Coca-Cola if you want one, or eat a Krispy Kreme donut. But we're going to tell you it's not good for you. And allow you to make your own choices. And that's really how democracy is supposed to function. And, parents need to be on their guard. Because we were told by the last administration, trust the experts. That's not a thing. It's not a thing. Right? I argued the Monsanto case, and they had experts from Harvard, Stanford, and Yale, and I had experts from Harvard, Stanford, and Yale, and they're saying two opposite things, depending on what their bias was. And so, trusting the experts is not a feature of democracy, and it's not a feature of science. It's a feature of religion and totalitarianism, not of democracy. So in democracy, we need, my dad told me when I was a kid, people in authority lie. And, the government lies all the time, and it lied to us about the dietary guidelines for 50 years. It lies about everything. It lied about the Vietnam War. It lies about everything. And, we need to understand that. We need to support government, but we also need to have be in a posture eternally of fear, skepticism toward authority. And that's what it means. That's the civic duty of living in a democracy. And I say today it's harder to be a parent than at any time in history, because you're being assaulted by social media and by your kids have their cell phones and they have everything available on that cell phone. And they're being told to eat the worst foods. When you go to that checkout counter, you've got just an array of poison there, so that when you're pushing your baby through in the shopping cart, he's reaching out and grabbing the Twinkies, and then crying if he can't keep them. And so corporations and government have commoditized us. They're taking away our souls, and they're turning us into just eternal consumers. And the stuff that they're selling us is bad for us, almost all bad for us. And so, we need to approach life understanding that and teach our kids that lesson. You be skeptical. And these are all lies you're being told, and that you need to make up. In a democracy, we have a responsibility that people don't have in other systems. You need to make up your own mind and make good decisions for yourself and your children.
What stirring advice. Thank you. Timeless advice, really timely for us as we celebrate America 250. Secretary, I mean the following very genuinely, not just from the standpoint of being a hospitable host. Thank you. God bless you. On behalf of not just the people here, including my Heritage colleagues, but I can tell you, and you know this, from tens of millions of Americans, for your courage, your moral clarity, your assembly of a great team, you're willing to work for an extremely consequential president. Know that you are in our daily prayers. Go get them.
Thank you all. Thank you.
August 23rd, 2024, Glendale, Arizona. A moment that reshaped the national conversation on health.
When Robert F. Kennedy Jr. joined forces with Donald J. Trump, it wasn't just politics. It marked the start of a new health freedom movement.
A call to rethink how we care for body, mind, and soul.
Recognizing the urgency and promise of this moment, the Heritage Foundation quickly stepped in, partnering with a growing coalition to challenge the status quo and return health decisions to the American people.
Through our initiative, Restoring American Wellness, we're tackling the chronic health crisis head-on. From food and farming
To childhood vaccine schedules,
To the effect of technology on young minds.
we're committed to building a healthier future for every American.
for every American.
Join us. Be part of the fight to heal this nation.
Together, we can make America healthy again.
Please welcome Jay Richards, Vice President of Social and Domestic Policy at the Heritage Foundation.
Well, what an honor to follow that, and thank you all for joining us both in person and online. So it's my delight to spend the next few minutes with a distinguished panel talking about this extraordinary first year. As Kevin Roberts said, this week, the first year anniversary that Bobby Kennedy was confirmed as the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and what a consequential year it has been. So let me just briefly introduce our panelists, and then we'll get started. First is Tony Lyons, who is the president of MAHA Action and an attorney and the president and publisher of Skyhorse Publishing, an independent publishing house he founded in 2006. Under Tony's leadership, Skyhorse has grown into one of the largest independent publishers in the country, with 23 imprints, a backlist of over 10,000 titles, and 57 New York Times bestsellers. Skyhorse has built a reputation for publishing bold, provocative work across a wide range of subjects, from politics and current events to health, sports, and fiction. And among its authors is one Robert F. Kennedy Jr., whose work on environmental and health issues has reached millions of readers. Tony brings to MAHA Action his experience building institutions, challenging conventional narratives, and amplifying voices that deserve to be heard. And we're going to hear from him about the extraordinary coalition behind these works. Next is Hannah Anderson, who is the Director of Healthy America Policy and Senior Director of Policy at America First Policy Institute. Prior to her this stint at AFPI, Hannah served as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy at the Department of Health and Human Services. She also served as a health policy advisor for the U.S. Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, advising on prescription drug pricing, commercial health insurance coverage, and other private health programs. Prior to that, she worked in the U.S. House of Representatives, advising on healthcare policy and other domestic policy issues for members of the Energy and Commerce Committee. In addition, she spent 2 years at the Boston Consulting Group in New York City working in their health care practice. Finally is Kim Mack Rosenberg, who is Children's Health Defense's General Counsel. She's an attorney in private practice located in New Jersey and representing clients nationwide on medical freedom issues, as well as healthcare practice management and disputes and insurance coverage issues. She focuses primarily on her services provided to individuals diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. She's been involved in the vaccine choice and health freedom movement for almost 20 years. Kim has testified in state legislatures around the country to retain, restore, and expand religious, medical, and philosophical exemptions to vaccine mandates, and she speaks to groups around the country on issues related to medical freedom. Kim has authored 2 books on vaccines, Vaccine Epidemic and the HPV Vaccine on Trial. And she's also authored a book on autism, The Parents' Autism Sourcebook. Please join me in welcoming our panel to the stage. Well, thanks so much for joining us. So good to be here. And I'm thinking about, Tony, a conversation we probably had just about a year ago. In fact, I feel like it was exactly this week, talking about the prospects for the year to come, and now it's happened. And so talk a little bit, because you've been involved in this work for years, and so people that maybe weren't plugged into the MAHA movement prior to the election might not sort of know how it's composed or what's happened since the election and Bobby's confirmation. So talk a little bit about the MAHA Coalition and what's happened over the last year or so.
Sure, that's a great question. 1 year ago, the MAHA movement was a group of activists in all different areas. Some cared mostly about food, some about drugs, some about vaccines, all kinds of different categories. And what's happened, and at the time they were just trying to bring these issues to the seat of power, to the government, and trying to be heard. And in the course of the last year, that coalition of MAHA advocates has turned into a real movement. And that movement then includes all of these different groups. And those are sort of subcategories. So we have 5 or 6 different MAHA entities, and they're all joined together now. We're renting space together, and we're working together as a team. And we recognize now that we're not advocates looking from the outside in. We're on the inside now, and we can have a real impact that we didn't have the ability to have over the last 20 years. That now we can speak directly to senior government members, to secretaries, to the entire cabinet. We can get in touch with people. So we don't yell from the outside that something is wrong, something isn't working. We go through the inside and try to affect change. And that's the real difference, that we feel that we're in this sort of middle ground between government and advocacy, where we can negotiate and inform and educate to have better health outcomes in all these different areas.
Terrific. I mean, Hannah, Tony's talking about this movement of activists that has now come together, and it's been amazing to see the sort of transformation over the last 12 months. But you've worked for many years in the policy arena, especially healthcare policy. And the issue that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. highlighted in his famous speech in which he endorsed Donald Trump was this problem of chronic disease. Which anyone that studies this realizes there are just all sorts of sort of perverse incentives in place that create these problems. What kind of incentives or policy levers need to be pulled, do you think, at least primarily, to shift that so that we're dealing more with a health economy rather than a sickness economy, which is what we have now?
And I appreciate the question. Thanks so much for putting this on. We really appreciate it. I think, when I start thinking of how MAHA and MAGA came together, it all came together because they were all centered on patients first. Bobby is so focused on making sure people have good information. And all 3 of us on this, all 4 of us on the panel have thought through, how do we get patients better information about their health? How do we get them more information about the food they're eating, the dyes that are in their foods, and even the vaccines and things that we're putting in our bodies. And MAGA really came, at the end of Trump's term to really focus on how are we getting people the tools they need to be healthy. And you realize these 2 things need to be anchored together, because it's a little bit truly immoral if you're going to tell someone how to be healthy, but you're not going to actually give them any of those tools to get healthy. And so when I think about this in terms of chronic disease, I don't even think about it in the abstract. I actually grew up on many of the safety net programs that we oversaw at HHS. So instead of thinking about it in the abstract, I thought about, what was my experience on CHIP, or CHIPS as we called it in Texas. So, and I think about, when I was on CHIP, my mom would have to leave her hourly wage job, come pick me up from school, sign me out of school, drive me back to the only doctor in the area who would take Medicaid. We would wait into a waiting room for a while, then see the doctor for 2 minutes, and then be told we needed a follow-up. She would drive us back to school, sign us back in, drive back to work, all for free healthcare, right? And CHIP is a very generous taxpayer-funded program, and that's why it's been bipartisan for so long, but it is by no account free. Because for anyone else doing the math in this room, that's a half a day's wages for someone who is making hourly wages. And so if my mom had better tools, right, she's getting the information of how it means to be healthy for her children, but she doesn't have the tools. She doesn't have the flexibility. And when she goes to her lawmakers and says, I need more tools to actually be healthy, to spend more time at the doctor, she can't get them, because instead it's just be content with your free health care. And so I think really, the next wave of MAGA and MAHA really enmeshing together is how do we give people more tools to be healthy? And I think, again, back to Chip, what would have been like if that mom had an on-site clinic? So instead of taking 4 hours of work, she had maybe, a lunch break that she could take her kids to and not lose out on a half a day's wages. So I think that's one of the great examples and what we're really focused on at AFPI and paving the way for making sure that as we tell people how to get healthy, we're not depriving them of the tools to do so.
Yeah, and so, if people know what they need to do, that's by itself going to change the incentives in the market. Unfortunately, we're dependent upon not knowing, unfortunately, as you said. Kim, you focused on this, what was considered the sort of most controversial subject, maybe in the MAHA portfolio, but the one that I myself feel quite passionately about, and your work in children's health defense on vaccines. What do you think are this kind of key legal impediments that need to be broken down in order to encourage and re-secure accountability and transparency, especially in the vaccine market?
Sure, thank you. And my focus, and I appreciate the shout out to the work that I did in my private practice. My focus is really with Ph.D. now, and our legal group. We launched 7 lawsuits last year. We've already filed one this year against the American Academy of Pediatrics under the federal RICO statute. And I think one of the biggest impediments is not necessarily a legal impediment. It's the inertia, I think that's a gentle way of saying it, of the system, and really trying to prop up what is clearly a broken system. We've all addressed it. The Secretary addressed it just a few minutes ago and continues to do that in his work. But the system really is fundamentally broken. The AAP has also sued the Secretary, and there's a lawsuit pending in Boston in federal court regarding that. You hear about that lawsuit on the news. You don't necessarily hear about the RICO lawsuit. And that's an issue, and it's not just an issue for the lawsuit, it's an issue for people getting knowledge generally. Censorship, cherry picking of studies is still a huge, huge problem in this country, and people don't know what they don't know, right? If you're not able to access information readily, you may not know what the healthy choices are to make for your family. And I really believe it is about having the opportunity to make informed choices for your family. But one of the things that was really, I sort of knew it, and a lot of people in this room and watching online probably know it, but many people may not. There was an order in that AAP case in Boston where the judge said that some of the papers he had received from the parties included declarations or affidavits from doctors saying, well, if I have to have a conversation with a patient about vaccines, if they ask me questions about it, I only get 6 or 8 minutes with the patient. If I have to sit there and answer questions, I can't see as many patients. I'm damaged because I can't make as much money. And that's really disturbing that money was the focus versus informed consent and helping their patients navigate that choice.
So Tony, we talked a little bit about the transition of the movement from an activist movement to an a group of people that can sort of change things here in Washington, D.C. But talk a bit about the pain points. Both of us, I know many times over the last year, something would appear in some particular publication. We thought, okay, this is obviously written to try to fragment the movement. And so could you just sort of talk about some of the pain points and what we need to do as a movement to make sure that we don't become fragmented?
Yeah, that's a great point, that there have been so many articles written saying that people in the MAHA movement disagree with each other, or that Secretary Kennedy disagrees with Donald Trump. And those seem to me just to be outside efforts to put a wedge between different segments of the MAHA movement or between Secretary Kennedy and the president. Nothing could be farther from the truth. MAHA's strength to a great extent comes from its diversity and comes from its disagreement. So we welcome all different points of view. And that's what's so different from the way the world worked before, that there was just one truth and that was kept in place by censorship and propaganda. And what we have now is real open dialogue. And that's what real science is. You can't have real science without disagreement. So the MAHA movement has all kinds of voices, and we encourage and welcome all different stakeholders. And we've done that all along. And I have meetings set up with manufacturers of pesticides to try to just see what we can do to have some impact there. And we want to meet with everybody, with all different stakeholders. And that, I think, is where we're going to see real progress going forward. Not by just saying that, we know the truth. That's what got us here. That's what got us to, like Bobby Kennedy said, spending 2.5 times what any other country on the planet spends on healthcare and having the worst health outcomes of the 30 industrialized countries. So we need to end that now, and we do that by having real dialogue and debate.
Absolutely. Hannah, amen, yeah, absolutely. And we've been present for this. I mean, at both public and private conferences in which there's sort of genuine debate about some of these things are very complicated. It's very heartening. Hannah, you worked both on the legislative side and on the executive or the administrative side. Can you think of some ways that on the executive side things might be able to move a little more quickly, maybe in the rulemaking process, or are there some things that just absolutely have to be settled by Congress? Because a lot of people outside Washington, D.C. don't realize how much takes place behind the scenes in the sort of rulemaking process. We might notice the sort of shiny executive order, but of course any executive order can be undone with a new president. So it seems there's some things left for Congress. So what do you think needs to be done there?
Yeah, and what a question, So, I think I'd first say, anything we can do to continue putting the system back into patients first. That's what the president has said. That's what the secretary has said. That's what all of these actions over the last year, which has been, incredible work and pace for 1 year, and really realigning patients first. So I think the president's great healthcare plan is a great start to go there. So transparency. What you're talking about is transparency, price transparency, transparency in scientific endeavors. Behind the stage before we came out here, we were talking about, during COVID, we all learned to trust the science and not look for transparency, but that really is a rejection of the truth. And so I know a lot of us in here have a worldview that's incongruent with postmodern thought, where there is no truth. But I think when we talk about transparency, we talk about there is truth and there's truth to find. So I think if there's anything that I would encourage the secretary to continue doing and the president is to continue pursuing transparency, whether that's in gold standard science, whether that's in transparency about what we're eating and the additives. I believe Congress might have to help out with GRAS, so I look forward to that. And then really price transparency. To be honest, I'd ask policymakers to really take it seriously. As y'all know, Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And like Bobby said, we're the only people in the world who don't know our healthcare prices before we get a service. It's the only part of our GDP that we don't actually know what we're paying for until we get it. I know many of us go to the doctor, and I recently went and they asked me to get a service. And I said, okay, but what's the price? And they said, well, we can't tell you until after you get it. And I said, this could be $80, $800, or $8,000. What do you mean you can't tell me what it's going to be? Right. So, that's certainly one of those things that I'd ask policymakers to really take more seriously, because if the average American has, anywhere between $500 to $800 in medical debt, that's 33% of Americans with private health insurance hold medical debt. And it's not from $100,000 got hit by a bus claims. These are coming from because they didn't know the cost of what they were going to get before they went and got it. And so when the president's talking about give people their money in the Great American Healthcare Plan, and when the secretary says make patients the CEO, we're talking about moving away from a system that really rewarded the bureaucracy and the corporate capture, and going back to a system that puts patients like you and me back in the driver's seat. This is your health care. This is how you take ownership for it. And we're going to make sure the ways that you can pay for it actually line up with that. So I think, the biggest thing Congress could do, I'd really say, is kind of really uncap HSAs. HSAs are a tremendous asset for people. Trump RX, we have a paper coming out at AFPI, hopefully today. showing that Trump RX with an HSA, because you can stack the discounts, is one of the best ways that you can lower your drug prices.
Wow.
So it's tremendous because you're talking about giving money back to the person. And it's kind of a wild paradigm shift, and if you're in health policy, to say that the best way to lower people's costs is to not use health insurance. So, I mean, kind of a wacky place we're in. But I'd say that, and then really seriously take a look at some of these some of these institutions like ACIP and USPSTF. Yes. Are they really adding value to our preventative health service? I don't know.
Well, now you briefly mentioned grass, so generally recognized as safe. So say just a little bit about that, because it's another one of these things that's it radically lacks transparency, in which lots of things have just been sort of waved through. So for non-health policy people, say a little bit about the grass.
Yeah, so grass is, was originally designed so that like milk wouldn't have to be regulated. Whole milk, something that we've been drinking for eons, doesn't need to go through a complex regulatory scheme at the FDA.
Or salt or baking soda
or salt
or something.
Or anything like that. Instead, that process has kind of been co-opted by, I'm trying to think of a way to put this simply, is by some of our food manufacturers to consider certain additives to our food under that same, we call it a loophole. And so that loophole is allowing all sorts of manufactured chemicals to end up in our food and bypassing any type of scientific review of those additives. There's a balance, of course, of not going overboard on regulations, but right now it's virtually unregulated what is going into our food because of the way that this is set up. So we're really looking forward to either Congress or some rulemaking by the FDA.
I mean, even if we didn't regulate these, just the simple fact that most of us don't know what's in our food because of this process, right? Just a simple disclosure.
But that's why I think what MAHA is it's so tremendous because it's going back to basics. Eat real food. I mean, my God, it's incremental. So we're not talking about MAHA as a crash diet, right? We're talking about MAHA as we're going back to basics of what is the food that's good for you. Turns out it's the food that's been around for thousands and thousands of years, and really moving away from ultra processed food. Kyle Diamantes from the FDA and I had a nice chat, and I was showing him a book of dietary guidelines. And one of my staff said, wow, this must be from, the 1990s. And I said, this was published in 2019. What are you talking about? Because it's talking about eat foods that are ultra processed because they're less calorie dense. What? Drink lots and lots of zero-calorie soda. And, as someone who believes that Diet Coke needs to be grafted onto the updated dietary a MAHA grandfathering.
The Trump rule.
Yeah. But, it's certainly not good rules to live by of just eating lots and lots of 100-calorie packs from Nabisco.
Crazy. Well, so Kim, we've talked a lot about what's happening in Washington, D.C., but I know you've done a lot of work in states. And in fact, it's the states that mandate vaccines. People don't realize this. The CDC may recommend, but it's up to the states. Talk a bit about what can be done at the state level, what you've done, and just advance the cause of medical freedom.
Sure. There's a lot that can be done at the state level, and Children's Health Defense is certainly working really adamantly for children and for others who have been impacted by vaccine mandates. We focus primarily on the children, but ultimately the goal is to remove mandates, right? So that people, again, can make a choice like with any other medication. I can choose to take aspirin or whatever, or I can choose not to. And particularly when you tie those mandates to school attendance, that creates an incredibly difficult situation for families. And we saw that. I was living in New York at the time in 2019 when New York State stripped away the religious exemption for families essentially overnight. Horrible things have happened. And each story, there's so many stories, thousands of them, but each one is also uniquely tragic. There have been families who've had to move away from the state, families, where mom or dad crosses the state lines to go to work. Children are it's a wonderful choice to make to homeschool your children if it is your choice, but if it's forced upon you, it can be very challenging for families as well. So we are fighting in states not only to overall abolish those mandates, but to put in place protections like religious exemptions and real medical exemptions, because in so many cases, they're not real. They're almost impossible to achieve. So we have a case called Doe against Oceanside Free Union School District, where a young woman was removed from school in 2019 with the religious exemption issue. Homeschooling didn't work for that family. They made the difficult decision. They began to vaccinate her, and she's had several adverse reactions to vaccinations. But at the point that we stepped in, she needed one hepatitis B vaccine. That was it. She had 7 separate medical exemptions saying she couldn't get that vaccine, it could kill her. And the district still denied her medical exemption. She even had gone to a walk-in clinic, an urgent care, and they took one look at her and said, we can't vaccinate you, and we'll write something for you. So those cases, we went to court and we got an injunction so that she could go to school again. So she is back in her classroom. But she's one of the lucky ones, right? Not a lot of people get that result. We also have a case that was just filed in December, Ph.D. against McDonald, who is the commissioner of the Department of Health for the state of New York, seeking to restore the religious exemption. And Ph.D. is a plaintiff, and 7 families who each have their unique stories, again, of religious exemption denial are plaintiffs. And we even have a plaintiff who is a junior in high school. She has a sister who's a senior. Under New York state law, they were out of school for years. She got a medical exemption, a temporary medical exemption that was taken away by the district. So she's out of school again. Her sister is 18. She's a senior. The New York law only applies if you're under 18. So her sister is free to go to school. The same unvaccinated, they're both unvaccinated. It really shows the arbitrary and capricious nature of how these exemptions work. So we're fighting that case too, and I think there's been significant changes in law from the Supreme Court, particularly a decision called Mahmoud v. Taylor, which came down last summer, which really impact and changed and sort of coalesced the idea of parent rights and the importance of parents' rights. It's not a vaccine-related case. It's related to educational curriculum. But it really has, we believe, broad applicability. So we're excited to see how that applies in this space.
So Mahmoud, of course, was about just the option to be able to opt out of sex education. I know, right? Yeah, right here in Maryland. It would not have occurred to me that this could have an implication for religious exemptions for vaccines.
Right, but parents' rights is such an important piece of the vaccine, vaccine-related choice, because parents want to make the decision, and the secretary talked about it. We've talked about people having different viewpoints, but it's making the choice that's right for your family and having that choice supported, and also being able to access public or private education if that is your choice.
Yeah, beautiful. So Tony, it's 2026, and that means that we have midterm elections coming up. And so those of us in the policy arena, of course, think a lot about that. But I mean, what do you think is important for the MAHA cause and this sort of constellation of issues, both in terms of appealing to the American voter, but also in terms of unifying the movement here in the next few months before the midterms?
So Secretary Kennedy said when he was up on stage that he prayed for 19 years to have the opportunity to do the work that he's trying to do now, to do what he feels and what I believe and what MAHA really thinks is God's work, that nothing could be more important than the health of our children and then the future of health of all the people in the country. Dr. Oz has said that for each added year in the longevity of people in this country, that adds $3 trillion to the economy. So, those are just insane numbers. And so when you look at that and you look at the team, the coalition that President Trump and Secretary Kennedy have put together, you can see the importance of their work continuing. for the full 4 years. And so that's where the midterms really come into play. And so we're here to support that incredible team that's been put into place, and to back that coalition and make sure that they're able to continue doing their work. And that's going to mean following the lead of President Trump when he endorses candidates, and then trying to work with those candidates to try to get the best possible outcome for public health, for the issues that MAHA has been backing over the last year. So generally, if you look at Senate candidate Julia Letlow, and President Trump endorsed her, and then one day later we endorsed her and committed to spend $1 million to help her beat Senator Cassidy, and win the election. So, that's going to be our game plan. We've had since multiple talks with Letlow's chief of staff and with other people who work with her, and we found that there really are points of contact with her that are really going to be impressive to the MAHA movement as they get to know her better. One of them would be medical freedom that she feels very strongly on. The other is healthy school lunches, and then grass, but various other things too. So we think there's a really great partnership that we can have with candidates all around the country to help them win, to help preserve this coalition, but also to make them more clear on what the MAHA issues are, what the science is behind them, what the propaganda and censorship in the past has obscured from the public, so that they can then message that better, and they can win in their races. So that's going to be our general plan.
Terrific. So Hannah, talk a little bit about this, not just the MAHA coalition, but it's now a MAGA-MAHA coalition, right? And I know the media, I collected these stories for months of, there's this sort of presumption that this was an marriage of convenience that was going to fall apart. I mean, what's your sense from your vantage point about the health of this much broader coalition?
Yeah, I mean, like I said at the top, it's MAHA is bringing together all the information, right? We're finally getting a clear-eyed view of what is and isn't healthy. And MAGA, at the last end of President Trump's last term, really rolled out this sweeping list of changes to be a patient's first healthcare system. And so I think that's what we're talking about here, is when we marry those together, you're finally getting a health system that is putting the patient first. So when we're looking through, what is the next 2 years look like and why the midterms are so important, I can't underscore enough of how much of a paradigm shift it was in healthcare for those two forces to come together. And when we were working on the transition, one of the things that I noticed in all of the old guides that had been written about, what do we do at HHS? We'll have a well-functioning bureaucracy. Just get that for a second. The old guide to how to set up HHS that had been kind of passed through the bureaucrats from time to time or over the years, it was a well-functioning bureaucracy. And I'm not neglecting, we should have a well-functioning bureaucracy, and one that is obedient to the president and the secretary. But the chief mission of HHS should be making people healthy. Mm-hmm. And with Secretary Kennedy and President Trump, we actually have an opportunity to do that. So the marriage of the two is so important because we're actually been given a chance. The secretary said, the president lets me do stuff and all the stuff he wants, and I can attest to that. We have a president who is so married to the people that he rode a garbage truck and did a shift at McDonald's because he's committed with the kitchen table math that everyone else is doing to figuring out how we can actually make healthcare better for people and make people healthier. And so this is critical. This is critical. We have to get this right, or else we're going to end up back again with patients last policymakers.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So we'll take some questions from the people in person here in the audience. But Kim, I want to just end with you briefly. Just give us, if you could sort of specify, you had a magic wand, one or two major policy changes or legal changes in this area that you think would make the most difference to American health, what would they be?
Sure. So I think of the things that we work on at CHD in particular, working on abolishing those vaccine mandates, getting choice back for people is incredibly important. We also have an incredible group that focuses on EMR and electromagnetic radiation, and getting the word out to people to understand how disabling EMR can be. And some people have very obvious reactions to it. Some people have less obvious reactions to it. But it's impacting everyone, and it's especially impacting children and their young and developing brains. And there's an increasing body of science showing that that's the case. But that's also working to take back control from the federal government back to the state and local level so that there's more control there over cell towers and other infrastructures like that. And then also we have a team that works with localities and with local groups to challenge those towers and to protect. And people come to that for all different reasons. Some of them come to it for health reasons. Some come because they're concerned their property values are being negatively impacted. And again, this is about what Tony was talking about. It's about, bringing people together and having a variety of opinions. But I think just working generally toward, part of our mission at CHD, and Hannah talked about this, ending this epidemic of chronic childhood disease. We have all the tools. We have a lot of money in the United States, but we have the sickest kids with the poorest health outcomes in well-developed countries, and that shouldn't be the case. We should have the healthiest babies, the healthiest children, and we need to put aside the broken system, figure out what's wrong, and fix it.
Thank you. All right, we few minutes. So have mic runners. If someone show me where the mic is, right here. Yes.
How you doing? My name is Sheila Armstrong. I am the founder of Cooking for Autism. We are based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We have a couple of cases. I wanted to know, do y'all have resources for parents? Because I have a couple of cases about the vaccination where we put in for the religious freedom to not have, for our families to not take the vaccination, but the school district still was pushing it for it. So is there a legal law firm, somebody that we can go reach out to?
There is.
You can reach out to me. I can say my email if that's helpful, or are we
Did
putting
you
up
really
the
want to do
information?
that? It's totally up to you.
No, it's
okay.
It's fine. Reach
Children's
out to
Health
me.
Defense.
Children's
Yes.
Health Defense. You can find me online and shoot me an email, and I'll connect with you, Sheila. I'm right down the road from you in Princeton, New Jersey.
Yeah, right nearby. You bet. All right, another question? Yes, right here.
Thanks so much for what you've shared today. I'm curious if there's more that needs to be done with elder care, just knowing that as there's problems on the front end for children's health, there's a lot of challenges for both those who are aging and also those who are caring for those who are aging in terms of costs, fraud, and also burnout. So I'm curious if there's policies you would like to see coming from this administration on that front.
I can take that. Yeah, so the ACL, so the Administration for Community Living, which I'm sure you're familiar, recently announced they're going to put out a caregiving challenge. And so the acting administrator over there is really passionate about getting the president's, one of the president's goals was to make sure that seniors can stay in their homes longer. And so that's something that I know Secretary Kennedy and Mary Lazare have really taken to heart, to make sure that seniors who want to be independent can stay and be independent. And so one of that is really making sure we prioritize caregivers. So I look forward to, I know we all look forward to seeing how we can do that, because again, like I think about my grandparents and my parents, and if there is a way to keep them from having to go to a nursing home, if they are able to accommodate and be accommodated at home, I look forward to that.
Yes, next. Right here.
Hi, I'm Christy Clark, and I'm a women's health advocate and breast cancer survivor. One of the things that I've noticed traveling around the country is that women's health is really on the back burner. It just really is. So my question is really for the two of y'all, Hannah at America First, and then of course Tony with MAHA. Where do you see the conversations going? Women are always put on the back burner with our health and with more people surviving things like cancer, but also putting drugs in our system like chemo. That isn't always exactly what we need. Where do you see that movement going?
Can I take that first? And then, so one, thank you, and I'm so impressed. I survived. That is incredible. And one of the things where I would point to where the USPSTF has really failed to do preventative health, and why I think we need new tools and devices to do that, is because I'm sure you're familiar, but like our current recommendations don't take into impact the what's like dense breast tissue. And so the current mammography can't even tell that. So one, that's a failure of so much of what, you go to the OBGYN and find out. And then the second is that Congress has had to stay to the USPSTF in a bipartisan rider for, I think, 15 years. Please cover these, the mammography for people who are 40, not just at 50. And so when you have the government telling you what is the latest innovation in preventative health, you actually end up being 15 to 20 years behind in preventative health if the tools that you have don't match with the information you have. So I know that at least at AFPI, we're looking forward to pushing out more on things like that in preventative health, but really exciting to see the department prioritize HRT and other kind of therapies for women going through menopause.
For sure. And by the way, there was a terrific event, I think it was in June of 2025, co-sponsored by the MAHA Institute and Heritage, actually at the Willard, about women's health, and amazing sort of unity, and looking forward to another event like that actually this year. So thanks for raising it very much. Okay, there are the mic runners. We have one over here.
I'm Bill Walters, a chemist. Could you please comment on the enormous amount of money spent in this country on bottled water? Is it worth it?
Not really sure where to go with that, but I would just say, generally bottled water in plastic is, probably not as healthy as bottled water in glass. But, part of the problem with bottled water is that so much of it has glyphosate in it. But it goes along with a lot of the sort of lies and half-truths that have sort of carried sway in the last 20 or 30 years. And, we did the MAHA Super Bowl ad, and that was the Eat Real Food ad, and processed food kills. And I think in the same way, all of these products, that have put plastics into just about everything that we eat or that we're exposed to, all of those things are obviously really bad for human beings. And we can do better. We can be more healthy. And in polling that was done by Tony Fabrizio, we find that 95 to 98% of the public wants healthier food, wants the government to regulate things so that we are not exposed to dangerous chemicals or dangerous microplastics. So, hopefully that answers it.
All right, I think room one more.
You talked a lot about physical health, and you mentioned preventative care, but what about mental health? We have one of the biggest mental health crises in our country right now across very many demographics. Why doesn't MAHA, or what's the future for MAHA, those principles to improve mental health?
Yeah, one of the issues there, I think, is, ties in directly with the food pyramid. So, there was incredible progress made after more than 30 years of just a manipulated food pyramid that was controlled by big food, big ag, that was meant to increase revenue, not to increase public health. So the idea that children, for the last generation, were going to school and eating donuts, eating sugary cereals, eating sodas or drinking sodas, is a big part of the mental health crisis that started there. So many kids who are on medications are poisoned when they go to school and then given medications to make up for those poisons. So I think there's a lot of progress that's being made there now, and that the food pyramid being flipped upside down is really the first step in that direction. And that was also a big part of why we did the Super Bowl ad, that we wanted to highlight to the whole country that they were being lied to, and that all of these foods that are advertised at the Super Bowl are unhealthy, that they can kill you, and that if you eat real food like Secretary Rollins and Secretary Kennedy would like you to eat, you will have, better lives, healthier lives, and have better mental health.
And if I would add just one thing, because what Tony's saying on over-medicalization is completely true, is we've replaced proper science with over-medicalization. But to your point, I would certainly say MAHA does include addiction. I mean, I don't know if you've ever listened to Secretary Kennedy describe his own journey with addiction. It's 100% rock solid in the middle of MAHA and the MAHA movement.
Absolutely.
And the president had recently signed, I think it was last week or maybe a week and a half ago, a bold new venture on how to treat addiction. But I think, it really needs to, and they're working on prioritizing, where is it that is, a priority to get people out of homelessness and fentanyl and drug addiction? Where is it more appropriate to treat like heavy substance abuse and, maybe that they've gotten addicted to painkillers over the time? So I think they're really working on sorting that out because we haven't ever had that conversation.
And
SSRIs, the number one side effect is suicide ideation.
Kim, you want to?
I do think, it goes back to what I said earlier about sort of this broken paradigm of how the medical system works, and it is over-medicalization, and we need to look at the youngest children to start because a lot of those children are being put on very heavy psychiatric medications and also multiples of them. And really reworking that system and finding solutions like nutrition that can be extremely helpful in getting them off that merry-go-round of over-medicalization, one medicine after another, add a new medicine here and there, you get a side effect, you take another medication. That we need to take a hard look at that, and people need to understand that there are options, but they can be difficult to access and difficult to maintain sometimes.
Thank you.
Instead of doing SSRIs or medications, why don't we do diet, nutrition, and exercise?
No, I agree with you.
All right, well, we have the person in the back has raised up the end sign, unfortunately. So this is a terrific conversation. Kim and Tony and Hannah, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you who joined us online and in person. And if you're here in person, please join us for some lunch. And I think we have real food available. Thanks so much. All right, exactly.